I'm one of those people with too many bios, right? So I'm really just the Chief Inclusion Experience Officer at Publicis Groupe. There's a wonderful woman named Billy Smith in Chicago who's actually LB's CTO and head of people and culture. So right now I'm just sort of wearing one hat, if you will. Oops, let me go back. This thing goes fast. So this morning, what I really want to do is talk about you all. I want to talk for about 35 minutes, and when I'm done, have you guys sort of primed to see yourselves in a role as either a leader, a designer, a change agent. So I'm going to talk to you about you. So I bring greetings from Lake Michigan on what's obviously a more beautiful and sunny day than any of the ones we've had so far in January and February. But hope springs eternal. I have spent my career in Chicago. I am going into my 38th year. I spent the first 30 in media. I was a practitioner and a business leader. And then I took a break. And then for the last 7 or 8, I've been on the talent side of it. And some of you may know that in my break, what I did is I went back to school. And I actually got a Master's of Learning and Organizational Change. Because as my career continued to develop, it was something I wanted to know about. I wanted to understand exactly what was happening in the intersection of business and business strategy and people strategy. So when I'm talking to you guys today about you as designers or leaders or change agents, what I'm actually trying to do is to recruit you into that intersection with me, because I think that that's a great place to explore and play. One of the things I do in my free time, so now that I've given the CTO title back to the person who appropriately handles it, I actually teach in the master's program that I graduated from, and I teach a course on organizational design. So today, what I want to do, because I got to tell you, I teach in a 10-week course. Right now, we're in about week 8. Marla only gave me like 35 minutes. I'm not going to be able to do in 35 minutes what I do in 10 weeks and what other people may do in years. But I do want today to get you guys to see organizational design as a frame through which to think about the work that you do. And in fact, Jack set us up well this morning because what he offered you was a design frame around transformation, right? And I'm going to add to it by offering you a frame around org design. And then by the time you're done with Bree at 1 o'clock, she's going to have offered you a frame around change. So you're going to be really ready. So myself and the 2 people I teach with, we sort of consider design as everywhere, org design. So right now, how many of you think org design, just real quick, how many of you think org design is just about structure, the boxes? Anybody think it's about the boxes? Okay. So how many of you sit in an activity-based workplace? You've got tables and chairs and desks. Who sits in that kind of workplace? That's an org design component, if you think about it. The business is trying to react to the design of something, and now the way you're sitting changes how you work. It's a design element that you've been introduced to. So my assertion is that design is with us everywhere, inside of every organization, but we're not always focused on it because in a funny way, it's kind of ephemeral. It's kind of hard to put your fingers on it. So that's fine. I'm going to try to help you guys put your fingers on it. So 2 buildings, the easiest way to do it. In fact, once you guys see how to do this, you can do it with your clients, you can do it in your own agencies, you can do whatever. But since I want to be kind of agnostic and not really talk about anybody's clients, I'm going to talk about the federal government because we're all taxpayers. So at least we can talk about the federal government, and they have to post their stuff on the web because we're taxpayers and we get to see it. So 2 government buildings, right? And I'm talking about organizational design. And I think you can guess which one of them is. So the one on my right is the Pentagon. It's shaped like a pentagon. So that's probably how you knew it was the Pentagon, right? And it houses the people who work on our military. And when I say military to you guys, you can begin to immediately understand some of the design around our military. So we have several branches. We have an Army, we have a Navy, we have an Air Force, we have a Coast Guard. You can see that in their structure. The way they organize and label themselves, from 5-star generals to 4-star generals, to platoons, to ranks. They habitate on bases, and the bases are organized in different ways. But we can see sort of some of the elements of their design. And we can read more and we can figure out how they do what they do. But this is an easy example to get you to see the design. We can tell on the US military. This building, it's Langley. It's where our intelligence agency is. We don't know much about them, really. We know they're run by a woman, Gina Haskell, right? She's their director. We don't know how many departments they really have. We don't know where they locate people. In fact, we think they're all over. In fact, there may be one here today, but I don't know. But we don't know much about their structure. We don't know much about their design. It's hard to see inside of that organization, right? And actually, that is part of their design, that we can't see their design. So between something that's really easy to see and something that's really difficult, I think most of us work in organizations where the design is kind of easy. So once again, as I talk about this topic, I'm still talking about it with you in the center of this picture. Because one of the things that Jack mentioned, and you'll hear other people talk about, is how do we, those of us who sit in that intersection, become T-shaped individuals. Now, some of you in this room are really deep into D&I. Some of you in this room are recruiters, some talent management. But what I want you to be able to do is now sort of ride a small layer of that horizontal bar so that you can see other things that might be happening in your organization that are relevant to you as practitioners. And one of the reasons why I think this is so important in our field, and Jack has already alluded to this, is we work in professional services. We only have people. Therefore, the design of our organization, all of our organizations, is incredibly human-centric. And we need to take that into account. So the big questions I think that are out there for you guys as practitioners, me as a practitioner, is, am I ready to lead in all the ways needed, right? And we get recruited into a lot of stuff to help design for and address in our organizations that we may not feel prepared for. And what else do I need to or want to learn? And so I told you guys I teach in this program, but anytime somebody tells you that they're a teacher, in reality, they have to be a learner, because the only way you teach is because you're willing to learn about it. So today, I'm going to give you a perspective on org design. Now, I'll tell you, one of the little debates that goes on, and as I told you, my program was Learning in Organizational Change. So when the program decides to bring this course on, and it didn't exist when I was pursuing my degree, but when they bring it on, everybody's like, well, org design is change management. Not really. really? So in my view, and this is my bias, and you talk to 5 people, you'll get 5 different points of view. If you guys are doing change management, you are changing a design that has existed. There's a design that's there. And in fact, my best bad analogy for you guys is think of your houses. An architect designed your house. They put your kitchen where your kitchen is. They lined up all the plumbing so that it would work a certain way. And then they turn it over to a general contractor who makes sure the drywall gets up and the electricity gets run and plumbing lines get plumbed, right? And then if you go to renovate, what you're doing is changing that initial design, but the design was there. So I'm going to try to give you a perspective on that. I'm going to give you a little map, right? And it's just a little map. And I'm going to tell you anything I tell you today, feel free to use, adapt, make it your own. This is not dogma. It's not necessarily the truth. And then I'm going to point to, not in that way, as in biblical truth, like, documented truth. It's a perspective. And then I'm going to give you guys a few tools. So that if you want to learn more, if you want to do more, you want to do whatever, you can. Now, I know some of you in the room, I'm not going to call you out because we still might be working in Langley instead of the Pentagon. But some of you are already doing this. I know you are. So ride along with me. I think some of you may be going, what is she talking about? And then some of you probably dabble in this to some degree or another. So I accept that you guys come into this room with multiple perspectives on it. And I'm going to keep this at a high level, but I respect the multiple perspectives. So here's my 6-part map. And once again, I've put you in the center of this. Now, I was going to draw all these crazy lines, but I got tired of fooling around with PowerPoint. This map looks kind of linear, but it's not. It does, I'm going to read it clockwise from noon, from 12, all the way back around. But it doesn't. And in fact, I would tell you in org design, any one of these elements is an appropriate place to start. But I'm going to start with knowing your environment. I call it your location. Anytime you've got a good map, it's one of those like the mall map, you are here. You need to ground yourself in some place, in some time, in some moment, something. Then an element of this map is business strategy. And I come from the school of strategy that says the presence of strategy is to help you say yes and to help you say no. If you're in an organization and you're saying yes to everything, you're not being strategic because inherently strategy is a prioritization exercise. Then org alignment. We heard Jack talk about alignment, so I'm going to keep talking about alignment, but in a different way. But it's the same thing. You still have to have some sort of alignment. There has to be coherence. The pieces have to fit together and stay together. Now, it doesn't have to be totally flush like a puzzle, but they have to be together. Then there's org culture. You've got to take the pulse. And I think Jack did a wonderful job of lining up in that kind of design why culture is so meaningful and sticky, and I agree with it. And then the last thing is change management. You've got to pick a path. You've got to find a way to help the organization and the people in it align themselves and keep aligning themselves. And don't forget, you're the actor in this map. So, the environment. We are organizations that respond to an environment that we're in. When I started, many moons ago, there were only 3 networks, there was no cable, there was 1 syndicated show, Hee Haw, I think it's still running. We were definitely a retainer business on a commission system, a fixed 15% commission system. The environment in which we got to structure ourselves was quite different. In fact, agencies back then looked a whole lot like their clients in terms of structure. And now we are on this project basis. We are fighting for fees. We have different tools that have been brought into our environment. Our clients have gotten ginormous. There are a lot of things that change in our environment. So the way I've done this is, on one side, I've just put out some questions that I think you guys as designers thinking about the environment might want to ask. These are only a sample. There could be 500 more of them, right? And then on the right side of the chart, I've put a few tools and resources, not the perfect one. And I will get this into the 4A's hands so that if you guys need to understand what these things are, you can, right? So what's going on in our industry? And importantly, how is my company responding to that? Our industry has been changing for the last 20 years. Some of our companies have responded sort of like ostriches sometimes, right? They've buried their heads in some sort of material. And others have embraced it. How is my company responding? And then, remember, I've got you in the center. Think about, how might this play out 5 years from now? And where would I like to see it? And let me just be clear. This is stuff I want in your head. You don't have to put it on paper. You don't have to go to your CEO. You don't have to go to your boss. It's a frame for you to try on. Are we in a growth or recessionary period? What is emerging? Who are our current and future competitors? What is their focus? Is there anything valuable to align there? So on the tool side, there's something called a STEEP analysis. It's very basic. It is what it sounds like. It's social, technological, environmental, economic, and political. You just write yourself a chart and that says in our environment, what's going on in the social lens, right? What might be a social thing? I got to spend a few minutes with Indra here earlier this morning, and we were talking about age and generation. That's social. Those of us who talk about diversity and inclusion, that's social. There's social dynamics. So what's going on? Then there's the SWOT analysis. Most of you have heard about it. What I've circled in the corners is a lot of times when people do SWOT analysis, there are 4 other words that need to be there. So in addition to strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the classical way this chart is drawn is that on the top 2 columns, on top of S and O, there's a word that's called helpful. And on weaknesses and threats, it's meant to show those things that are harmful. And then if you go horizontally across from the S and W, those are the things that are internal. And the O and T are those things that are typically external. So now what you're really talking about are internally driven things that are helpful, and you can play out on that chart. The last thing, there was a guy named Kurt Lewin. He's one of the forerunners of organizational development. He put together this very simple tool that's very powerful. You're probably using it a lot in change management. It's called a force field analysis. You simply list all the forces that are working for you and all the forces that are working against what you're trying to do. And you try to weight those forces and come out with a point of view, right? So those are some tools. There are probably 5 other tools I could have put up there, not trying to be exhaustive. So back to strategy, saying yes, saying no. If you're not saying no to something, you're not doing strategy. What are our priorities? What are we saying yes to? What are we saying no to? What is driving or eroding our business value? And yes, you guys, you're people and culture practitioners, and I want you thinking about these things, if only because this is what your CEO is thinking about. And I think I can say that with a little bit of credibility because I was one, and I was thinking about this. And to have a partner who can ask me a question about it or be curious about it. How does our strategy inform the capabilities we need? It's not just the people, it's not just the skills, it's not just the role, it's a capability. What do we need to be really good at? And I'm not sure it can be everything, right? But maybe. And what measures or metrics matter to us most? So all those questions, you've got it. You guys have gotten it. Most of our planners now talk about canvases. Lovely tool out there called the Business Model Canvas. Some of you may have the book. You can get it. All of these things I did screen grab off the web, so you can find all of this on the web. But read that. There was a Harvard professor, Michael Porter, writing sometime in the 80s. He wrote some of the definitive work on what is strategy. And that's Porter's activity map down in the bottom. And what he says is you can map the strategic activities of any system. That one happens to be Southwest Airlines. But you guys could just sketch out within your own firm, what do we say are the big pillars that we're after? What are some of the secondary things? You can do that as well. Org alignment. This is sort of the heart of org design, because design says we've got to keep it coherent. So you don't want a bathroom in the middle of your living room, right? There's a coherence to it and an alignment to it. And when you do the renovation, you got to put in a beam for the load-bearing wall after you take out the wall, because you want now an open design, right? You can tell I watch too much HGTV. So the questions to ask: how well do our key functions deliver against our strategy? Do the pieces work well together? Those of us who work in creative agencies, some of us probably have classical creatives, the ones who are doing film and TV and came from sort of that art view of creativity, alongside the digital technologist, who's also a creative and bringing a different focus to that. Well, we put it under this umbrella of creative, right? But how are they working well together, and what does that mean? And how do we have a point of view around that? Is governance clear? A lot of us work in matrix organizations, you know? They sort of have all these intersections, and there aren't very good rules for how you navigate. Said differently, the street lights are always blinking red or yellow, and you don't know when to go into intersection, right? What trade-offs are necessary because of the structure that we have? And what I will tell you, just so you can be really good org designers, even in the best design, there's always going to be a trade-off, and there's still going to be some resulting tension. So as a designer, you're not designing for perfect, you're designing for well-aligned. But just know there's always going to be something that doesn't quite fit right, and you're designing for that too. So I've put up one of the most famous models out there around org design. Was done by a man named Jay Galbraith sometime in the 70s and 80s. It's called the STAR model. You can look it up. It's great. Anytime you walk into a room and somebody says, I know org design, it's strategy, structure, processes, systems, and people, they are quoting Galbraith to you. Galbraith, though, said it wasn't that linear. But the other thing that I really like about this particular rendition of his STAR is that right under strategy, which is sort of that top central bubble, is the word capabilities. Because what Galbraith built was a model to help with organizational decision making, and he believes that your capabilities are derived from your strategy, and those capabilities then inform some of the other parts of the bubble. On the bottom, so also writing about org development in the 80s and 90s, was another Harvard professor, Chris Ardress. And he came up initially, he was trying to figure out how organizations learn and why organizations get caught in failure traps. And so what he came up with was this notion of double loop learning, where organizations would figure out on, are we doing it right? He called that the single loop, where you get in sort of this performance trap. Are we doing it right? Are we doing it right? And ignoring, are we doing the right things? So that was the double loop, that you're always asking, are we doing it right? But are we doing the right things? And then as things go on, because things evolve, somebody turned it into the triple loop, which then says, how do we know what the right things to do? How do we know what those right things are, right? So they added in a third component. And when you're doing alignment, you can say, are we getting stuck in just how we're performing? And are we too worried about doing it right? And we haven't asked questions about what are the right things to do and how do we know? So taking the pulse of culture, Jack, I love you. I'm in love with Edgar Schein. He's probably about 93 years old right now. As an OD professional, he's written so much. It's just crazy. I decided if I was ever stuck on a desert island that Edgar Schein was the only OD person's work I was taking with me. That's how important I think Edgar is. He does talk about 3 levels of culture. So he says artifacts, that's what you can see. So now when you walk into an organization, if you see those crazy posters, it tells you something. When we all worked in offices where people who had the most power were in their corner offices, that told you something. And now that we're at activity-based workplace, it tells you something else different. Then there's the espoused values. What we say, you know, we really want it, we're friendly, we're all holding hands together, we're all fine. That's what we say. And then there are the basic underlying assumptions. That's the really tacit stuff. That's the stuff we really believe. And when Jack was talking, those gaps between the walk and the talk usually are because of those deep underlying beliefs and because they really conflict with what we say we're about and what we put up. Got it. And then you guys know this better than I do. There are various org assessments. So if you don't want to do the Schein model, build it on your own. You can call the leadership, the TLCP people, you can call human synergistics, you can call decision-wise. They'll help you figure some of this stuff out too, right? And last, change management. Okay, so when you find in your org design that things aren't quite aligning, you're gonna have to do change management. You're gonna have to say there's a from to you wanna work, something that needs to be better out there. And so how do we get where we need to be? What changes need to happen? Who are our change agents? Who's a resistor? Come on. You do some change, there's always a resistor. Or worse than resistors, what about the undecideds? They're just out there sitting on the bench. And which path may work best? So I've given you 3 paths here. The first one is Kotter, the 8 steps. Kotter always starts with a burning platform. So there has to be some big problem you want to go solve. And then he works you through a process where, you know, you communicate that, you identify it, you illuminate it. That's fine. There's a couple of academics, I'm going down to the bottom picture, Nadler and Tushman, they've been writing for a while. And what they try to dimensionalize is whether change is incremental, evolutionary, or revolutionary, and whether it's easy to do or not easy to do. You can take that kind of frame on change, and not all change we do is of the same quality and ilk. Not all of it has to be a burning platform. Sometimes it can be really kind of simple and easy and get through it quickly. And then in the middle, I've put in, there's a book out there, and I just think it's a little gem, and I just think this is a gem of a change movement. It's called Positive Deviance, and it comes out of the NGO world. And essentially what they say is that we all live in systems, and that whenever you're in a system and the system has a problem, there's probably some group in the system. And back to culture, they're probably a subculture. They're probably a tiny group. They're not the power brokers. You may not even know that they're there, but they actually have the answer. Oh, I couldn't have planned that better myself. That's great music. To give you an example from the NGO world, if you think about drinking water in Africa, they don't have highly filtered water like we do. A lot of times, their water has worms in it. So when the people go in, the NGOs go in to study, you know, the presence of these worms, what they noticed, what they went and did was found a village with a lower incidence of worms. And then they go, why did that happen? And what they figured out is that the women who would go pull that water, before they would give it to their families, they would pour it through their skirt. And that the simple act of pouring it through, and think of it, they built their own sort of rudimentary filtration system. but they were doing it, and their families had less incidence of worms. But that's positive deviance. So what I would also tell you is, as a change practitioner, sometimes the things you want to build into your organization are already there if you know where to go look for them, or if you're willing to go look for the people who sort of have the idea, but they don't have the influence or the power or the socialization within the organization. In fact, to a different degree, I think our new business teams inside of agencies are probably our best positive deviants. If you think about them, we say, you go out and you pitch, you get us new business. You're allowed to break every rule we have. You're allowed to create new content. You're allowed to create new processes. You're allowed to blow up anything you need to blow up in order to win this business. They are positive deviants because they make something incredible happen for the organization. So with that, I've walked you through those 5 pieces, but the 6th part is still you, and I hope that each of you, based on this, is just a little bit more interested in being that leader or designer or change agent. I hope that you guys are a little bit more interested in what your role can be. Because one of the things I was trying to figure out when I went back to school is, why didn't HR really have a seat at the table? And part of the reason is because the table talk is about strategy and how the org is designed and how it's aligned. And as practitioners, if we're not prepared to talk about those things, then it's hard to claim that seat at the table. But given our industry and how it's constructed, and the fact that people are our only asset, I think it's just imperative that people like us have a seat at that table. So hopefully this is a map and a little bit of a language that'll make you more comfortable thinking you need to be at that table. And when you're at that table, because I'm going to speak it as if it's true, when you're at that table, you have a few tools, a few questions, a few ways of thinking about this that makes you sit up straight in your seat and do what you need to do in order to support the organization in the way you can. So you guys now, after 30 minutes, are totally capable of being designers, leaders, and change agents, at least in your minds. With that, I thank you for your time and attention today.
I loved the analogy that you used with the architect in the home. I thought that was really, really good. And thank you also for the 6-part map and tools for each of them. Really good material. I was going to come up with a CIA joke, but I think I'll pass. So we do have a couple of questions.
Yep.
And may I remind everyone, at least I was told to remind everyone, that when you are voting on the Slido, if you see a question that you like, you could just press you like it, and therefore people will register and know that there are a group of people who like the question. So voting on the questions, you could do that. So first question is, coaching a director of talent and operations, who she reports to a CEO, who doesn't see her role as important, anyway, to change his practice to the triple loop?
Yeah, I think
that's a tough question.
Actually, I think that's a good question. So part of it for me would be asking, what does he see her role as? So it's almost that first, the single loop, right? What just has to get done? Is this because the CEO has put that person in just an executional frame? And then to work back out and say, right, what is the opportunity that a talent ops or any talent person can bring into that conversation? And then it is scooting it back up to, geez, what is the thing that's going to help change that frame all the way around. Now, Bree, who's over there, is going to talk about framing later today, so I'll leave a little bit of that frame, but you could use the triple loop to sort of locate where he is and figure out different questions to ask him that could reframe that role. Or that talent ops person might want to start talking differently to their CEO about what they're doing.
Great. How helpful was the organizational theory learned in your master's program as you've worked to apply it to the realities of all culture of the companies that you've worked with?
Okay, so this is crazy. The program I was in didn't just teach us one theory. In fact, I won't get into the sort of underlying part of it. We were free, we read what we read, and we were free to come up with points of view of our own. So I've sort of developed my own kind of theory. And what you're hearing in my theory, as I've interpreted what I learned, is there is the organization, and it has its strategies. And I'm one of those people. Josh Burson at Deloitte is there. I'm in that camp that says what we all need to start designing for are people strategies. So I think that there's an inherent fallacy in our work, which is, or in the construct, and Jack got at this earlier, from that mechanistic or industrialistic view of organizations. So the employer determines what the work is, and an employee comes in and just does that work. I think what we're figuring out now is that there are people, and people develop the way they do, and people come in and out of buildings to partner, to co-create, to work for organizations that are doing X. And so I sort of separate. I don't like to use the employee word. I think we're people who choose to come to work. And when we start talking about now employee engagement and why turnover is so high, I think the big part of it is because some employers haven't figured out how to engage us as people. In fact, I would tell you, and this is sort of like a Russian nested doll, right? Which is the industry we're in. One of the biggest changes that's happened over the life of my career is that we now believe, and maybe they always were, but we now actively believe that consumers are in control of the brand experience, mostly because of the devices we all carry around in our pockets. Well, guess what? We're consumers. We have that control. Why wouldn't we be trying to exercise that control in our workplaces, right? Because we're humans. And so I think it's kind of funny in our industry that we sort of think consumers have power, but employees don't, although employees are consumers. So anyway, that's it. What advice do you have?
For HR leads who are stuck in the trenches and don't have the opportunity to get involved in org design.
What I would say to you is, and hard for me to know, I don't know who asked the question, whatever. Find one thing. Find the most promising avenue, right? It could be tiny, it doesn't have to be big. Find one thing where you can start inserting yourself. One area that allows you to show up a little bit differently and begin to expand that space for yourself, right? So give you an example. Performance management. It's one of my usual whipping boys. And I can't wait to get my hands on the new HBR that talks about performance management on the cover, Marcus Buckingham. But anyway, take performance management. Something that really is kind of trench work. Start asking questions about, well, for our major capabilities, how is our performance management system supporting our major capabilities? Do we need to redesign it a different way? Do we need to add another feedback element to it? Or if there are emerging capabilities in our field, how do we start building that into our performance management system now? So you're talking, you project into the future, you grab something from the future and tie it to something that's happening now. But here's what I will tell you. I don't encourage you to do that so that you can change the performance management system. I encourage you to do that so you can have a different conversation with your boss or the CEO. So it's not about necessarily getting it done. Although, if you come up with a great idea and they greenlight it, go, 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 right? But the purpose is to find ways where you can attach yourself to strategic conversations and potentially change outcomes. And if you're really deep in the trenches, you're going to have to tie it to something that's connected to what you're already doing. And use it sort of like as a rope to pull yourself up. When designing best organizations, the catalyst scenario was the best way. And I'm going to assume that means how to best design and advise your CEO. I don't know about the best way, but I'll tell you one way I used to do it, right? Because I can have radical ideas. So what I would do is set up sessions with the CEO where I'd say, I want to come in and talk about some talent things, items, what I'm seeing, but I didn't tie it to specific work. And I would ask for 15 minutes of time so I could talk about things I was seeing in the culture and what that might mean or how that could signal a shift in what was going on. Right? So I think setting aside informal time with your CEO to let them know what you're thinking about, coming up with a few ideas or models for how to do different things. So we were doing talent reviews, and I came up with just a really simple Venn diagram model of the three major roles in the agency and how they were different and how some of the skills were different. It really was just a Venn diagram. But you could see the top performers, no matter what, and Venn diagrams eventually, the three bubbles make, intersections, then you have the core. Without fail, that simple one sheet of paper described every hypo we had. And it was just a simple piece of paper. One of the things, we all talk about design thinking and things like that. Well, one of the things in design thinking is that you start with a hypothesis and then you run a prototype. So back even to that question, how can you prototype things with your leaders as a way of you testing thinking rather than having to have the answer? So apply a design thinking methodology to it. And how do we get our agency to invest in the people running talent? Yeah, I'm going to run out of time because I only have a minute. I think that one's a trickier one, but I think in our industry it's a little bit easier because we only have people. And the value proposition in our industry is around people. So I would say if you can get away with it, change the title of your department away from HR and call it people operations. Call it people strategy. Rename yourself. Claim something that's higher in the value chain. Add other things into your capability set that allow you to change that name if it's possible so that you can be more connected with where the business sees itself going. And I know that opens up another can of worms, but I would think about changing the name of what you do.
I also think that it also is critical that you have leaders who actually believe in the function.
Right.
So that therefore they can make the investments that you're going to need.
Absolutely. All right.
I'd like
Thank
to
you.
thank Renetta.